So during the most recent developer livestream, we got some massive information on not only an itemization overhaul, but also a crafting overhaul. Now, one bad piece of information is that these changes are coming with Season 4, but as we're about to go over, this is not just some small changes or tweaks to affixes. This seems to be a legitimate full overhaul of both itemization and crafting. Now, even though the big overhauls are coming with Season 4, we're still going to be getting some changes with Season 3, so I think that's a good place to start. Now, one of the biggest pieces of information of kind of some of the specifics we're getting with Season 3 is that they are planning to do a ton of balancing changes like they did with Season 2. And if you remember with Season 2, the patch notes were like 41 pages long. Pretty much every unique in the game was changed. A lot of the aspects were changed. They overhauled a bunch of the stats in the game, like vulnerability and crit damage. So I think on the balance side, there's going to be quite a lot of changes. There's probably going to be a ton of new builds that come out from that, especially when you mix in all those balance changes with the new content coming and whatever is going to be the new feature for Season 3. But there's not going to be those huge overhauls to the entirety of the itemization systems. We're also getting some pretty big changes for Hell Tides that will also affect Forgotten Souls that will affect your itemization and gearing a little bit. So when Season 3 starts, Hell Tides are basically going to be up all of the time. There's only going to be a 5-minute window of downtime in between Hell Tides, instead of like right now where you do a Hell Tide, then you wait an hour, then another Hell Tide comes up. So it's just going to be a small 5-minute downtime, let you go back to town, sort through all of your loot, clear your inventory, then you're probably going to wait a couple minutes, and then boom, another Hell Tide. And they mentioned this after talking about Forgotten Souls, which has actually been one of the biggest roadblocks for enchanting your gear in Season 2, because you can get so much gold from Whispers, you could very easily run out of Forgotten Souls before you run out of gold. So now with Season 3, since you'll basically be able to infinitely farm Hell Tides, it'll go back to probably being more gold dependent, but that's good because gold is so much easier to target farm. But that brings us to the most interesting information, which is for Season 4. And they started out this conversation with talking about the biggest pain points for the current itemization in the game. One of the biggest things they mentioned was that sifting through all of the different items and all the different loot you're getting takes too much mental bandwidth right now. It takes too long to sort through it all, and it's just way too tedious. So that was definitely one of the biggest issues they've targeted, but they also talked about how there's just too many items and it takes too long to find those perfect rolled items. So getting a 4 out of 4 roll for whatever build you're going for takes way too long. You go through way too many items to get to that. And one of the big issues that also ties into that is there's too many possible bad rolls just because of what stats are allowed to roll on a piece of gear. Like for instance, on something like gloves, you could get a bunch of plus horse skill ranks on one item. So I've definitely gotten one item where it's plus skill ranks to 4 different core skills on one pair of gloves. Completely useless. You shouldn't be able to get all those plus ranks to core skills on that one item. It doesn't make any sense, and it's one of the big reasons why so many items are so badly rolled, and you go through so many items because they can roll stuff like that. And then they also mentioned that there's not enough runway for items. Basically, players have almost no input on if an item is actually good or not. So usually how you would play the game right now, if you're say just looking for rare items and the affixes on them, usually earlier on you would look for 2 of your 4 stats that are good so you could at least roll the 3rd one and get a decent upgrade. Once you get later into the game though, you're basically only looking for items with 3 good affixes on them for you so you can try to roll the 4th one. But that's the only amount of input you actually have on that item. And with the overhaul, they're planning on addressing all of these different points of feedback. Now, we didn't get a lot of specifics of stuff that's actually coming in Season 4 for these changes, but one of the biggest things that we're talking about is giving players a lot more agency in the items they're getting to turn them into good items. And they specifically mention this as they want items to basically be the start of a journey to getting like a best in slot piece. So once Season 4 comes around, say you get a somewhat decently rolled item, they want that to be the start of your gearing. So you get this somewhat decent piece of gear that you think maybe you could change in different ways to make really good or even make like a best in slot. So they want to give you a ton of additional ways to customize our gear, change the stats on them, and allow us to have that agency to try to turn decent items into the really good items we want. And basically everything that we're talking talking about. Sounds like they're doing a complete crafting overhaul and probably trying to make it much more like other ARPGs like Last Epoch or Path of Exile. I would probably expect it's going to be more towards Last Epoch, as they have still a really good crafting system, but a more simpler crafting system. They're probably not going to go anywhere close towards PoE because there's just a decade of layered crafting on top of layered crafting. That's probably way too intricate for a game like Diablo 4, but I think there is a lot they can do with this. Like I've seen mentioned before where there should just be items that allow you to kind of throw rare resources at an item to see if you get good rolls, or to fully randomize it, which would either turn it into maybe a decent item or a really good item, or just fully brick the item and now you just throw it away or sell it. And then as mentioned, they want to fix all the other pain points they went over. So they want to make it generally easier to find like those perfect rolled items, which is probably going to be due to the new crafting systems, which I think is a really good way to go about it. You can remove some of the bad rolls, not allow items to roll as many of the bad rolls on them, like getting all plus skill ranks to core skills on one item, and then just add in a ton of new crafting options on top of that, which will allow you to turn in all these items we're throwing away into possibly good items. And when talking about this, they did also mention that end game content and itemization are the biggest priorities for Diablo 4 as an entirety. So the main things they're focused on right now is new end game content and their itemization overhaul, which I think is probably the best thing they could be doing right now. Need more end game content, need much better itemization. So I think they're definitely going in the right direction. They also did talk about another change that I don't know if this is going to be with Season 3 or if this is going to be with Season 4, but they wanted to make some changes to obtaining 925 item level loot, which is the current cap or item level. And one of the first things they mentioned is that world bosses won't be dropping guaranteed 925 items anymore. Again, not exactly sure when this would be implemented, but one of the main reasonings for this is that once you say get into World Tier 4, you could just straight go do a world boss because it's not something you have to personally do. There's probably going to be level 100 there that'll kill it, and you'll just get a bunch of 925 items that at a much lower level, like say you get into World Tier 4 level 60 and you can use ancestral items, you could go do a world boss, get 925 items, and because of how much stats those give at how low of a level you are, you're going to put on that 925 item even if the affixes suck. Getting a 925 item at like level 60 is insane damage increases even if every affix on it was bad for you. Getting a 925 necklace or armor piece, even if it had all bad stats, gave you so much armor or resistances that those were also just much better than anything you could get. So you would put on that 925 item and not get any upgrades for like dozens of levels until you get much more into the end game and start getting 900 loot to try to get good affixes on that high item level of gear, which is really bad for gearing actually. But one of the other big things they want to do with these items is allow you much more chances to get 925 items from more of the end game bosses and from the harder content in the game. So from things like the Nightmare Dungeons or those end game bosses. So it sounds like they're probably going to want those end game bosses and the much higher tiers of Nightmare Dungeons to give you a lot more 925 drops than we're currently getting. So it changes 925 items from being able to be readily obtained from world bosses once you get into World Tier 4 to now you're going to have a smoother item level increasing curve as you do more and more difficult content. Now, a very important piece of last information we got is loot filters. Now, we got the information that we won't be getting loot filters until after Season 4 and the itemization changes. And the main reason they gave for this is that these itemization changes are so substantial that if they made a loot filter before Season 4, it would just break once Season 4 was released. So they would just end up having to make two different loot filters, which doesn't really make much sense. But that is a very interesting piece of information, that these overhauls are so substantial that it's going to completely change the way items and itemization is actually going to work. Because if you would think that they were just doing like an overhaul to affixes or something, that a loot filter would still work the same way. But these changes are so substantial in how items are actually going to work that a loot filter just wouldn't make sense previous to Season 4. So even though it sucks we're not getting a loot filter for Season 3, it does make it a little bit more exciting that this is such a big change. But they did say that all ARPGs should have a loot filter, and it's definitely something that they want to do, but they need to do this itemization overhaul before a loot filter. But that's pretty much all the information we got on a future itemization and crafting overhaul, but that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.